and good afternoon. I'm so happy to be with you guys today. There was a lot of really good chats in the last session, so I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys think about this one. So Melissa was able to give you an overview of the DBI process, which is really just an evidence-based way to make sure that the supports that you're providing for your students are working, whether those supports are for special education or RTI MTSS. But before we get to the point where we're providing those evidence-based interventions to students, we need some data about those students. So that's what we'll talk about today. So we're going to focus on the Classworks Universal Screener and the data that the Classworks Screener reports. And this is the starting point of the DBI process for many to determine which evidence-based interventions each student will need. So here's what we're going to cover. We're going to talk about the purpose of the screener. I'll show you how to administer the screener for your students, super easy. We're going to learn what type of data the screener provides for different stakeholders, how to use that data to determine which students need supports, and then we're also going to talk about how the screener informs interventions with Classworks. So before we get into the logistics of the screener, I want to make sure that you have confidence in our assessments. The universal screeners cover reading and math for grades K-10, and they have been validated by, as Melissa mentioned, by the National Center on Intensive Intervention, or NCII, and received high ratings for validity and reliability. The screeners are vertically scaled assessments, so you have accurate insights on your students' present levels of performance. It's nationally normed, so you have percentile ranking data for your students to help identify who needs those extra supports, and it offers predictive validity with your state assessments. So the screener serves four main purposes that we'll talk about today, and we are going to look at this in more detail in the product as well. So first, the screener provides results that are domain and skill specific about present levels of performance for each student. So great data for you to use to support PLAF statements for IEPs, as well as for the tiering process for MTSS or RTI. Second, the NCII recommended percentiles are used in Classworks to help you identify which students need those added supports. And then throughout the product, which you'll see in a few minutes, we have these nice color coding options to really show you easily which students need support. And then third, it's a valid and reliable measure of growth throughout the school year if it's administered as recommended, and we recommend administering in the fall, winter, and spring. And then finally, it helps you to begin that DBI process by using each student's screening results to generate evidence-based interventions. These come in the form of individualized learning paths with skills that students need to work on or are ready to learn. Our evidence-based interventions are available for reading and math grades K-10, and the skills that students are working on in their learning paths are organized in a research-based teachable order to accelerate growth. So now we know the purpose of the screener, let's get into some logistics. Some important things to know about the screener. One, it is already on for your students. You don't have to do anything. When students log into Classworks, they have it assigned. So let's take a look in our demo site. I am logged in as a student here. I'll probably say this a couple of times, but this is our demo site. So sometimes the data looks a little bit crazy. But so Chester, you can see here, he has assessments. He's just going to select take a test. Now it shows retake for Chester because you do get 5 attempts at taking the screener, but when your student first logs in, it'll just hit start or say start and they can just select. Something else to note here is that Classworks does have a Spanish universal screener in reading and math. And so you do have to turn those on, and I'll show you how to do that in a little bit for students. And if you do turn them on, they would show up here. But keep in mind that if you are using the Classworks instruction and you want that learning path, they need to take the English screener. So the Spanish screener doesn't generate a learning path for students. All right, so how can you make sure that you'll get the best results from students when they're taking the screener? Well, you're going to use all of your testing best practices, right? So you want to know your district's testing windows. Your Classworks district administrator has already worked with us to set those in Classworks. So I'll show you in a minute when we log in as a teacher where you can see that. You want to make sure that your students understand why they're taking the test. We've got student-facing videos in the Help Center and some resources that you can share with them, because regardless of how you're using the screener, whether it's to measure growth, to understand those present levels, or to generate learning paths, it's important they do their best, because those results are going to drive those next steps. We recommend setting 60 minutes per subject aside for a single administration of the screener. That's plenty of time for most students to complete the test, but should students need to take the assessment over multiple days, it does bookmark for you. And as I mentioned, students do have 5 attempts at each subject. We don't recommend scheduling students to assess on both subjects on the same day. You want to allow at least a day in between subjects, just as you would with other formal assessments. The screener does offer accommodations like read aloud. So the passages, questions, and answer choices are automatically read aloud. If you don't want it to read to the student, just be sure to communicate that clearly to the student. You can have them leave their headphones off, or you can mute the tab. And the final thing I want to mention about administering the screener is about grade level override. So what if you have a student who is a 6th grader, but you know on most domains, their present level is 3rd grade, or you administered the screener at a student's grade level and they are just truly struggling to complete it. You do have the option to change the grade level of the screener for the student. So let's look at how you do that, and I can show you those other couple of things that I promised to show you. So let me log back in as a teacher here. Okay, so you can get to student details by just clicking on the student's name where that's available, and you'll see here student details, and you want to go to student settings. And so here in student settings, you will see universal screener grade level override. This is where you can select the grade level. This is also, as I mentioned, where you can enable the Spanish universal screener for the student and also choose the grade level. It's going to default to their seated grade level for both of those. All right. So screener's on, your students have tested. They can log in and do that at any time, as I've mentioned. And so now we want to take a look at the data that you have available based on your student screener. So remember, this is what kicks off our DBI process. And you will use this data along with other data likely to determine which students need those added supports. So there's 3 main types of data that you can get with Classworks. You have the live and printed report data that teachers will use for documentation and decision-making. You have reports that you might want to send home to parents or for meetings. And then you have data, school and district level data to see what's happening in Classworks across, specific groups, school or district-wide. And we'll go through each types of those, but let's start with the data in Classworks that you can see based on the screener. So we're going to come over to progress monitoring, and I'm just going to choose a class here. So one of the probably most popular questions we get on the success team is, how do I know if my students have actually taken the screener? And we try to make that easy for you. So you can see here that you have a bunch of filters over on the left side. And I'm filtered by Classworks Universal Screener right here. And so everyone that has what we've been calling the rainbow chart or the Skittles chart, everyone that has that, has taken the screener, because as soon as the student takes the test, we are going to provide this suggested tier information. So we can see that Connie hasn't taken her screener yet. You also have this information available for the MAP Growth and Renaissance STAR, as well as the iReady assessment. So you're able to see suggested tiers for those other 3 screeners as well. So let's dive into the detail on a specific student. I'm going to pick George. He's my favorite. And so I'm here in screening. Throughout the next couple of days, you're going to notice that, or hopefully we will have covered each of these areas in Classworks, but we really do try to make it easy for you to have one holistic view of what the student is doing in Classworks in what we call this student details screen. So here, starting with screening data, you can see, again, this rainbow chart for the suggested tiers. I want to mention about these suggested tiers. Obviously, this is based on the data that we know on the student. So we're talking specifically today about Classworks data, or as I mentioned, those other partners, we do use the NCII recommended percentiles. So let me just go back and on this top of this rainbow chart. So this red urgent intervention, this is going to be 10th percentile and below. This yellow intervention is going to be 11th through 25th. This is going to be 26th through 39th, the screen or on watch. And then the blue is going to be 40th percentile and above. I do want to mention that I know this says at above grade for blue, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the student is working above grade level on all their domains. So these may likely be these probably won't be the kids that are receiving tiered supports, but it doesn't necessarily equate to that they are kids that are learning above grade level. So I just want to make that clarification. So let's go back to George's screening data. And so you can see there his suggested tier. You have a lot of information on the screen, his overall score, percentile, his grade level equivalency, and you can see that information by specific domain as well. We try to provide a lot of information that you might need, not only for understanding it, but if you are constructing CLAF statements, you have a lot of information here that you can use. One thing that we added new this year are these ready to learn statements. So not only do we know that George is a third grader and he is reading at a second grade level, but we know what George is ready to learn in the domain of reading. And all of this data is going to inform, if you do have the Classworks instruction, what George receives in his learning progression as well. So you can have the confidence that he's receiving skills to work on where he's ready to learn or at the level that he needs in order to improve. And then I'll also show you later some additional assignments that you have to support George in these areas. Now you can print this if you want to, but I want to show you printable reports that you have available as well. So let's look at Jared. And you can see some of the same information available here on Jared's printable report. I'm going to show you how to print this report in just a couple minutes. But you have additional information on this printable report as well. So here you have dyslexia indicators for George or for Jared. So if a student takes the K2 reading screener, you do have these indicators available for dyslexia. You have to select, and I'll show you when you're running the report, to have this indicator actually show up on the report. And then the other thing that's new this year are these early literacy indicators. So for students in reading who have taken the K3 reading screener, Classworks has identified some at-risk and low-risk areas on these specific early literacy strands. And the nice thing about this, aside from this additional information that you have to understand about the student, is that, again, all of these are going to be informing Jared's learning progression. So he is going to get skills turned on to support these. And additionally, we have created some preset early literacy assignments, and we'll show you how to get to those later so that you can support these as well. And then we'll take a quick look at Jared's math report. Again, you have all that same information, but here you have the dyscalculia indicators. So for students who take the K2 math assessment, you have the ability to turn on these indicators on the report, just saying that the student may need some additional testing. And then we have the early numeracy indicators. So again, these are the at-risk and low-risk early numeracy strands. And we do have preset early numeracy assignments to support these, as well as these will be turning on skills in Jared's learning progression. So let's look at how to print these reports real quick. We're finally leaving progress monitoring, and we're going to go over here to the reports tab. And this is an assessment report. So we're going to assessment and student screener summary. And I'll just select create. So you have some filters here, obviously, that you can select. Those are pretty self-explanatory. I will say that this title prints on the report, so make sure that you name it whatever you'd like to have at the top of that printed report. And this is where you can determine if you want the dyslexia and dyscalculia indicators to show up on those reports. So it defaults to not printing. you would have to select them in order for those to show up. So, and then you can select your window and create. You can also schedule the report. So if you know that you're going to have this report 3 times a year, fall, winter, spring, you can have them come right to your inbox when you want to. You can also pin the report, and then that way your favorite reports will show here under My Pinned Reports. So the last type of data that I want to show you is if you are a Classworks administrator, you should have a tab called Insights. And these are some data visualizations that are powered by Amazon QuickSights across different areas of Classworks. So we'll focus on assessment and growth since we're talking about the screener today. And I won't spend too much time here. These are pretty powerful. There's a lot, you can dive into a lot of data here. And if you are a Classworks administrator and you'd like any additional training on looking at these dashboards and how to take action on these, just reach out to help.classworks.com or chat with us or your account manager, and we can definitely set up some one-on-one time to go over these with you. But just some quick data, you can see how many students have assessed for each window. Again, this is our demo site, so the windows are crazy. But color-coded charts following you around again, so that as students are assessing for each window, you can see what type of supports are needed across your school or district. And the other thing I will point out that people like about this one, so I'm in language arts, for example, and so you can see by window as well how the students are performing overall, even down to domain. So you've got some really nice information to see how things are going at a little bit of a higher level here. All right, so there's a lot of data we reviewed that you can get from that universal screener. So once students have tested, as I mentioned, now Classworks, if you have the intervention piece of Classworks, is going to determine what students need, and that's going to be turned on for them in their learning progression. And before I show you the data that you can see on the individualized learning, I want to make sure that you have confidence in our evidence-based interventions, just like I now hope you do in our valid and reliable screener. We have a whole library of research and impact studies showing that our interventions work, and you can find those at classworks.com/efficacy. And the design of the intervention itself is research-based. So Classworks combines 2 widely recognized research-based models, the standard protocol model and the problem-solving model. And this is because we know individualization is a major strength of the problem-solving model, and it leads to higher rates of effectiveness, but it's also very time consuming. And so districts tend to go towards standard protocol because it's a little bit easier to implement with fidelity. But Classworks combines the most effective aspects of each of those models and leverages technology to do the individualization and save that time for the teacher. And so this quote really summarizes nicely the benefits of combining those 2 models, saying that that combination really will lead to the greatest responsiveness of students. And I won't go through all of our efficacy studies, but this is just an example of a 2022-23 study that we did. And we have these across, a variety of racial, demographic, and subpopulation groups. But you can see that in the 2 blue bars, those are Classworks users. So the aqua bar are what we call our power users. They use the program with a little more fidelity. And the navy bar are all students that use Classworks. And you can see that they really outperformed those students in the gray, who are the students that didn't use Classworks. So we really feel confident in our evidence-based intervention. So now let me show you in Classworks the information you have available for individualized learning. So on the screen, just like in progress monitoring, you have some high-level data that you
can... The house should be clear. Our students should be in class. Please close your door.
Sorry about that. So you've got you can see the time on task for students. You can see the average of how your students are performing. And then let's just look at George again. And see the detail that you can see on George's individualized learning. So recommended skills is George's learning progression. George has worked on a lot of things and has a lot of things turned on because he's a demo student, but these are the skills that any data that's in Classworks has recommended for George but you're the teacher and you know best. So you have a lot of autonomy over this learning progression as well. You actually have the whole K-10 learning progression available to you. So if you decide that there's some skills here that you feel like George needs to work on, you can easily turn those on for George, and they will show up in George's learning progression. So, and then of course you have all that overview data here as well, scores, time on task. And up here, so if you're looking for specific information for documentation by skill domain, you can filter up here. And so I'm looking at word analysis specifically. I can see George's overall mastery, how many skills he's mastered, and how much time he's spent just in the area of word analysis. And I am able to print this if I want this specifically for documentation. And then you can also drill down to see specifically in each unit. We call each of these units of instruction in Classworks. You can drill down to see how George is performing on specific skills. You can see the history of why the skill was assigned, as well as the state standards they tie to. So you really have a lot of detailed information on this individualized learning path. And all of this data is probably going to resonate a little more in our session tomorrow, where we are going to be trying to form a hypothesis for why maybe interventions aren't working, and we need to use some of this diagnostic data to do that. All right, so just a quick recap. So we've talked about how to administer the screener. Remember that it's already on for your students. They, once you tell them which one to take, they can go in and press start. You get a lot of different types of data. You have that in-product Classworks data, as well as the reports in the reports tab that you can print, and those insights available to you if you're an administrator. And then finally, we talked about how that data really kicks off the DBI process by informing those evidence-based interventions in Classworks for students.